Welcome back to IC. What we're going to do today is to look at JavaScript as a programming language itself. So we're going to just look at JavaScript without looking at how it can be used together with HTML and others. Just looking at JavaScript by itself as a programming language. And I'm using some slides that relates to the book Programming the World Wide Web by Robert Sebesta. So you're highly encouraged to read that book, um, and you can certainly listen to this brief introduction to JavaScript that I'm about to give you. So basically, JavaScript is a programming language, as I mentioned, by itself, and you get chunks of this code being inserted into web pages, as we will see later. A key thing about JavaScript is that it is dynamically typed. So JavaScript and Java, well, they sound similar, isn't it? So what's the difference? Well, the one thing you find with JavaScript is that it's dynamically typed, meaning that you find that in the functions and in the variables, you don't really get the, you don't really have to, you don't really have to specify the types explicitly, right? So for instance, you might declare certain arguments or variables as type int or as type string, but in JavaScript, you don't have to do that. The system will try and figure out, depending on what value you assign to the variable, the system will try and figure out what the type of that variable should be. So it's also the language used for Ajax, which we'll come back to later in the subject. And you can refer to stuff inside a HTML page from JavaScript by using what's called document object model. We'll come to that as well. So often they say that it's not object oriented. Well, it does use objects, but not much of inheritance and so on. So sometimes it is said to be not an object oriented language. But you have objects with properties and so on. So you can embed script code, JavaScript code into HTML documents using the script element, and we'll come back to some examples of that. Like any language, it has identifiers, it has variable names, reserved words, and you can insert comments into JavaScript code like you would insert comments into Java code. And there's also a whole range of operations, expressions, and so on, which is typical in any programming language. Number, string, booleans, so these are some of the types. So there are many similarities with Java. And strings, for strings, they have string libraries and so on. So you can see an example here that you have three variables, sum, today, flag, and you notice that you don't actually state explicitly what the types of the variables are. Because sum is assigning the value 0, the JavaScript system will infer that the type of sum is integer. And because today is assigned a string, right, that string Monday, right, is given in double quotes, the JavaScript system will infer that the type of the variable today would be string. And similarly, the type of variable flag would be Boolean because it's assigned a Boolean value. And you get, of course, null and undefined values as well. And then these are typical operators that you find as in Java, the math operators as well. And then there are the concatenation operators as well that are present, plus namely to concatenate strings. And there's a very extensive string library to find the character, the position, the length of a string. Index of gives you the position of a given character within the string. You can extract a substring, convert it to upper or lower case, and so on. So these will be very useful, as we will see. So because there are no explicit types, but if you wanted to try and find out what type has been assigned to a particular variable, you can use a type of operator. And then there's a date object, as we'll see, which will return information about the date, about the current date. So in JavaScript, if you have a HTML document that contains JavaScript code, the JavaScript code can refer to the document that it is contained in using this document object. Right? So you have a code that wants to refer to its containing document. You can do that by using the document object. And if you want code that needs to refer to the containing window, the window that contains the page which contains the code, then you can use the window object and so on. So you can also write, using JavaScript, you can write strings into the document itself, which will be immediately displayed on the browser using document.write. We will see examples of this in the labs. So you can pop up alert boxes using the alert function. You have confirm, you have prompt. So these are different functions that you can use. Control statements as well are present, like typical relational expressions, arithmetic relational expressions are there. Boolean expressions, Boolean operators are there. Typical switch operators is available, and the usual while, do, loop operators. Object creation we probably won't need to bother too much with in this subject. It kind of contradicts what was said just now, that it's not object-oriented. In a way, it is object-oriented, although it doesn't deal with classes and inheritance as such. But you do get the notion of objects. Arrays, so you do, with a capital A, you can create arrays, and even arrays of multiple types, as you can see in my list 2. You can also create arrays of homogeneous type and so on. You can manipulate arrays, concat, sort, reverse join arrays. So it's quite an expressive language. You have functions as well, and you notice that every function in JavaScript is declared using the function keyword, followed by the function name and then the formal parameters. Notice that the formal parameters don't have to have the type stated next to it. And this is different from Java. In Java, you declare a function, you declare the return type of the function. Here, you don't need to declare the return type of the function. And in Java, you don't use the function keyword. Here, you do. Okay, so these are some examples of functions. Notice you don't have to declare the return type of the function. The system will try and infer it from the code. Constructors, right? So I'm not going to say too much about constructors here, except to say that you can create new objects in JavaScript if you need to. Pattern matching using regular expressions, we'll see examples of that in another video. So you can search using regular expressions and so on. But we'll look at some example of the use of regular expression later on. So this is how you construct regular expressions. We just leave it here as reference. Plus, star and question mark is just denoting the extent of repetition and so on. So these are more information about regular expressions. You can replace part of a string with another, and we're going to make use of some of these regular expressions for form validation, as we will see later. Debugging, well, there is the JavaScript console that you can use. So let me just show you. I'm going to show you the JavaScript console. Go to View, go to Developer, and then JavaScript console. And you notice that if you run JavaScript code, it can show you the JavaScript code that is used, and when you run it, you can inspect what happens, right? So which is useful for debugging purposes. Okay, and then there are other tools as well, but we'll stick to the basic JavaScript console tools in popular browsers. There are some built-in objects like window and document that can be used within JavaScript code, which has been inserted into a HTML document in order to refer to the containing document or the containing window. So it's kind of interesting, right? So you have JavaScript code which you insert into a HTML document, and from within the JavaScript code, you can use an object called document, a built-in object, to refer to the document that it is contained in. You can also use the window object to refer to the window that the JavaScript code is currently contained in. And there are some other elements as well. In general, a JavaScript code can refer to the HTML document that it is contained in, including with referencing different parts of the HTML document, and that is using what is called a DOM, or the document object model. So what a DOM is basically a JavaScript data structure that corresponds to the HTML document. So imagine when a browser loads a HTML document, the HTML document is converted into a data structure, just like what you learn in algorithms and data structure, into a tree-like data structure. And because it's a tree-like data structure, from within JavaScript code, you can access the different components of that tree-like data structure. In other words, you can access different parts of the HTML document using this data structure. But we will look at lots of examples of this later on. So here's an example to start with. But the key here is that you can notice that HTML code has a hierarchical structure. And this hierarchical structure, where we have elements embedded within other elements, for example, the table elements embedded within the body element is embedded within the HTML element, the head element is embedded within the HTML element, the title element is embedded within the head element, and the TR, table row element, we have two table row elements embedded within, nested or embedded within the table element, and you have three of the TH elements embedded within one TR element, right? So there's a hierarchical structure, and you can imagine a data structure, a tree-like data structure that corresponds to this HTML structure. And that standardized data structure is called a DOM, or document object model. By using this DOM, you can refer to elements within the HTML document. So you start with document, which is a built-in object called document. Document.forms0 will look at the first form element within the document. .element0, that will look at the first element within the first form, which in the above example is that push me button. You can also use the attribute ID in HTML elements. So in this example, you have a button called push me, and instead not just the name of the button, but a unique ID called push me. And if you want to refer to that button, you make use of a method called get element by ID, the argument being the ID of the button. So in this case, what you have here is document.getElement by ID push me, and that method call will return a reference which you can use in your code, a reference to that particular button. So if you look at the bottom example there, document.getElement by ID top group, that assigns to the variable called DOM a reference to that form, right? Because the element with ID equals the top group is actually a form, right? Is actually a form. So DOM here becomes a programmatic reference to this form. And then from then onwards, dom.toppings.length will be, DOM would refer to this form, and then dot toppings, so that will refer to that, and that as well. So this checkbox is called toppings, and then the length of that checkbox is the number of entries in that checkbox, right? And then it checks whether each of this has been checked. There are many events that can happen on a page, and This is about the dynamic behavior that can happen. So whenever you do stuff, when the user moves the mouse over the page, clicks on stuff, clicks on certain buttons, clicks on certain keys, all these are events that happen on a page, and these events can be captured and used in JavaScript. Right? So for instance, you want to have the event on mouse down. So when the user clicks on the mouse, when the mouse button goes down, you want to do something. You want your web page to do something. So these events can be captured in JavaScript, and the corresponding event handlers can be written for those events. So for instance, on click is an event attribute. So when you click on something, you can fire up a method. Right? So, and that method that is fired corresponding to an event occurrence is called an event handler. So in this example here, if we want to detect a click on the form, so first of all, you get a reference to the form, and if the ID of the form is called my form, document dot get element by ID with the argument my form will return DOM, will return a reference to the form in the variable DOM, and then if the first element of the form dom.element 0 has been clicked, you can see here on clicking element 0, on clicking the first element of the form, what should you do? Well, you should call the method plain choice. So that's what this does. This line of code here sets up an event handler. So when you click on the first element of the form with the ID my form, the method plain choice will be called. So that's what's happening here. And we're going to look at many examples of other types of events as well. Different ways to set up event handlers as we go. Okay, and form validation is something that we'll look at so that we can detect errors in the form input before information is sent to the server. So it saves server and internet time. You don't want to be transmitting non-valid information. Right? But we'll come back to this later on. Event handlers return true, that means things check out fine. If you return false, it causes the browser not to advance to the next page. But we'll come back to this example in the context of form filling. But in general, handler actions, once these methods are called, and typically they return true or false. There's also a standardized event model that's specified in DOM2. Right? There are HTML events, mouse events, different types of events. But for most of our intents and purposes, there are some common events that we just need to deal with or to remember. Other events like when the document loads and so on. And you can also add event listeners. Right? And adding event listeners means you're trying to associate a method, the event handler, with a particular event. So there are some underlying mechanisms to do that in JavaScript. Canvas element, you can create a rectangle into which you can embed graphics as well. So this is quite new, and these graphics can be drawn using JavaScript. Now, we saw the object document, right? So within your JavaScript code, you can refer to the containing document. You can also refer to the containing window using the window object. And you can also refer to the containing browser. And the browser is called the navigator. So the navigator object refers to the browser itself. So you wanted to get information about the browser. The name of the browser, is it Chrome, Internet Explorer, Safari, or you want to get the version of that browser software, you can do so as well using the navigator object within JavaScript. Now remember, the DOM model is like a tree-like data structure, and being a tree-like data structure, if you can remember from algorithms and data structures, you can navigate around this tree-like data structure using the properties of the nodes. So you can look at the parent, the first child, the next sibling, and so on. But we'll come back to more examples of that later.